Well, good afternoon, good morning, where you're calling in from or dialing in from, and welcome to the Second Lines webinar series for colleges and universities. My name is Scott Holmquist, and I'm the president of Second Alliance. Today's webinar is part of a continuing education series that's open to everyone in the higher education community. Therefore, you're welcome to invite friends, whether they're at your institution or another. Today's broadcast is being recorded. And after the broadcast, we'll send you a link to the recording along with the presentation slides, letter templates, and other information that's discussed today. Also, if you missed a portion of it, or if you'd like to revisit it or share it with staff members who were not able to attend. In your control panel, you'll notice there's a handout section, and we've uploaded some handouts that have some notes pages if you want to print those out and take notes along the way. Also, we'll be taking questions along the way. We use the questions panel, not the chat panel, so please use the questions panel. Your questions are anonymous, so no one will know you're asking them. It's important to ask questions. It's a meaty topic that we have today here, and our topic today is guarding against identity theft, the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act, red flag rules, and student awareness. We'll be discussing those topics along with identity theft, certain responsibilities, and cybersecurity rules. Our guest speaker today is Ruth Sharp. Ruth is the bursar with the California Institute of Technology. She's responsible for providing operational leadership and oversight for student financial services. Ruth has worked in the accounting and finance industry for over 30 years, which of course means that she started when she was 10 years old. She's been a speaker for NACUBO, and in fact sits on the NACUBO Student Financial Services Committee. She's been a speaker and a member of PacWest for 8 years and the president for the past 3. She's been a speaker and the founder of the Southern California Bursars Meeting, and a speaker for the Treasury Institute for Higher Education, as well as the Cruise and Collections Conference, which we host every year. This year is July 21st through the 24th at the New York Hotel in Las Vegas, Nevada. Ruth graduated with a Bachelor's of Science degree in Organizational Management from the University of La Verne. Also, she earned a Master's of Business Administration from the University of Redlands in 2008. She's a dear friend of mine. I enjoy her company. I really appreciate that she shares her time and her knowledge on these topics. If you haven't had a chance to meet her at a conference, you really should. She's a genuine person. I like her dearly. And Ruth, I will pass the microphone over to you to begin this topic. That's very important. We appreciate your time. Welcome, and I'll pass it to you now.
Thank you so much, Scott. It's my pleasure to be here for this presentation. This Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act, GLBA, is just such an important regulation, and I really want to make sure that we just dissect this and talk about these rules with our listeners today. And not only will we talk about these rules and how they guard against identity theft for our customers, but we're also going to talk about student awareness, because it's not enough that we protect our customers, but we also have an obligation to teach our students how to protect themselves. So why are we doing this? Well, there were 16.7 million victims of identity fraud, which was a record high that followed a previous record the year before. So due to the rampant identity fraud, universities, of course, are becoming ever more governed by privacy and data security regulations, such as FERPA, HIPAA, GLBA. GLBA includes red flag rules and, of course, the security safeguards that we're going to be talking about, the safeguard rules, which are cybersecurity rules. And then the European Union, the EU General Data Protection, and these are just to name a few. So let's get back on today's topic, the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act. And this was enacted in 1999, and there are now 4 rules that protect consumer financial information. The first one is a financial privacy rule, which really just explains what information a company gathers about a client. The second two, number 2 and 3, are written information programs that need to be put together. And these regulations, there isn't a lot of wiggle room with them. So I really want to make sure we understand them. The number 2 is the safeguard rule. And this is a cybersecurity rule. And it's, again, about cybersecurity protection, which is protection of internet connected systems, including hardware, software, and data. And the protection is supposed to be against a cyber attack, or basically we're putting together a program to protect against hackers who may destroy or damage the computer network systems. So many of you are sitting there today saying, well, gee, I'm not in IT. What do I know about this? Well, if you disperse Title IV funds, chances are your auditors this year are going to say, hey, what's your safeguard rule program look like? Where's your cybersecurity policy? So you want to make sure that you have a plan in place, and we're going to talk about how to work with departments to get that plan going on. Number 3 is the red flag rules, which was later implemented in 2010. And we've talked about red flag rules before. If you don't have a written program, you'll want to pay attention to the details of this one. And we're going to talk again also about what a red flag is and how to detect it, how to prevent it, how to mitigate identity theft that pertains to covered accounts. And we'll talk about the actual definitions of what these things are. And then if you already have a red flag rule, you'll just want to listen up again to make sure that your program is covering all of these items to detect, prevent, and mitigate identity theft pertaining to covered accounts. Then the last item here, pre-texting protections. This does not have to do with text messages necessarily, but I'm going to describe what that is. And we'll move on to student awareness. In the student awareness, we're going to explain the how and the why that you need to share with your students. And we are also going to give you a list, and the takeaways, again, will be in handouts, and you'll also see the slides, but a list that you can share with your students. All right, so with regard to both the safeguard rules and the red flag rules that are both in the GLBA, you're going to want to develop and maintain written procedures for the security plan, which is the safeguard rules, and also for identifying red flags. You're going to want to be able to assess cyber security risks and detect red flags as well. You're going to want to implement reasonable safeguards or rules, oversee service providers, and educate staff. Now, these are our third-party service providers that manage things like our student loans, our cashiering. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. You're going to want to put in your program a way to evaluate, monitor, and adjust these procedures, and you're going to want to be able to respond to both security breaches and red flags. So let's get started. But before we do, I just want to say we're here to help, but here's the disclaimer. The information in this webinar is not intended to be legal advice and may not be used as legal advice. However, every effort has been made to ensure that we're providing updated information. This information should not be used in place of your school's general counsel or your own legal counsel. So basically what this means is I'm going to give you as much information that I can share that I know is accurate and to the best of my knowledge, and you will form your procedures. We'll give you templates that you can use and verbiage in the templates, and this will allow you to draft your program and then take it over to your general counsel, your upper management, your president of your university, and make sure that the program is what your school feels is best for your university and your customers. Okay, so with that being said, let's talk about some of the definitions. So identity theft, in case you're not familiar with that term, some people also refer to it as fraud, but identity theft is a fraud that's committed or attempted using personally identifying information of another person without authority. Okay, so it's using somebody's information and they didn't give you permission. And a red flag is simply that. It's just a pattern or a practice. It's when we think, oh my word, that doesn't look right, something's wrong. We call that a red flag. It's just activity that indicates the possible existence of identity theft. Covered accounts, they are the continuing relationships with third parties. So covered accounts also include any other account that a school offers or maintains for which there is a reasonably foreseeable risk to the customer. So anytime we're gathering students' information, or even faculty members, staff members with their benefit information, if we're gathering that personally identifiable information, birthdays and social security numbers and addresses, that's personally identifiable information. Now, if there's a covered account, if there is an account or a situation where you are, oops, let's go back. We're not there yet. I'm sorry, Scott, we're trying to see the bottom of the slide there, but that's all right. We're just going to say then you're going to be in the creditor position. And so we want to talk about what is a creditor, and that's the next definition, the one that may not be showing on your screen. A creditor is a person or an entity that bills after providing goods and services. So if you're gathering personally identifiable information and you are a creditor, you're providing goods and services, then we're going to want to make sure that we have a program in place that mitigates the risk for identity theft.
Yeah, are you not seeing that bottom little strip at the bottom?
I did not, but that's okay.
Okay. Let me know if you get to a place and I can read it for you, or.
Oh, I just went through it. That's fine. I think
okay.
what happens is when the folks get their slides after the presentation, the handouts, they'll be able to see that information. It was just that one little last bottom line. My apologies, that's the formatting.
And this one has one on the bottom regarding advanced funds. So if I see one at the bottom, I'll just chime in.
Yeah, it's okay. I see that one. So, so the GLBA, both safeguard rules and red flag rules, require organizations to protect the privacy of their consumer financial information. And again, is your school a creditor? Well, there are 3 questions here. And as Scott mentioned, the last one may not be showing on your screen, but the first question is, does your school regularly in the course of business obtain or use consumer credit reports? Some do and some don't. So the next question is, does your school provide information to consumer reporting agencies? Some do and some don't. But the last one that may or may not be visible on your screen but is on the slides is, does your school advance funds which must be repaid in the future? Now, most schools do administer student loans. So if that's the case, then your school is a creditor. Okay, so then.
Yeah, Ruth.
Yeah,
if I may, also in the credit reporting, if they're using federal loans, they may not be reporting the school directly, but the loan servicer may, which also makes the school responsible.
Oh, that's a very good point. Guilt by association. That's correct. So just what Mark was saying, even if your school isn't doing it, if somebody's doing the reporting on your behalf, then you are a creditor.
Yeah, in fact, some schools don't think they are because they think the billing servicer is doing it, but in fact, it's typical that a billing servicer is using a subscriber code that's owned by the school, that they're not reporting it as XYZ servicer, they're reporting it as Caltech. And it might be think that just because they're not physically doing it, that they're not the ones doing it, but they might be doing it in your behalf.
Yes. Thank you for mentioning that, Scott. That's very important for us to realize. Okay, so how are we going to put together these programs? Well, it's going to be a participatory effort to protect customers. And we are going to want to develop a campus working group. And you'll want to develop a campus working group for the safeguard rules. And then you'll probably want to develop a different campus working group for your red flag rules if you don't have those in place yet. And that is because when you're putting together the safeguard rules, which we're going to talk about first after we get through this introductory part, the safeguard rules are those cybersecurity rules, and you're probably going to want to have your CIO or your Chief Information Officer looking through the program that you're putting together and helping you to develop that. So look for the members that may be involved, representatives throughout your university, the president, the provost, your senior officers, and like I said, for your cybersecurity rule, especially your CIO, and then, of course, your bursar or student financial services director. You will want to implement the procedures to protect your customers, and how you will be doing that is you'll be setting a policy and assigning a manager for maintaining compliance. So your program is going to have some policies in it, and you're going to set somebody in charge of that so that every year they are taking in reports from their managers about issues, and they're managing the risks, and they're also managing the situations. You're going to identify, again, departments on campus who create or administer the covered accounts. So right now, for example, at Caltech, we have a person from HR that is reporting into me. I have a person from our Athenaeum Staff and Faculty Club who is reporting into me because they bill out on accounts there. We have my accounts manager here in the bursar office, and we have somebody from financial aid who reports in. And I'm actually the person who's assigned for maintaining compliance. Every year I send out a report. So again, administer the program to those departments, train the departmental staff about the program, implement the procedures to monitor the red flags or to identify the security risks, and process the identity theft claim. And then review and update the policies and procedures annually. All right, so let's start talking about safeguard rules. Again, the safeguard rules are cybersecurity or protection of the internet connected systems. They include hardware, software, and data, and we're trying to protect them from a cyber attack or hackers coming in and damaging the data or the computer networks. And I'm going to tell you again, I've put this list together predicated off of information that I've read. I've talked with our IT folks. I am not an IT expert, so you will want to use this information and talk to your IT people, and then they will probably provide you with a lot more other information and help you put together a very robust program. So while we're looking at this program, Safeguard Rules program, what we want to do is we want to identify risks, and we want to come up with procedures to help mitigate the risk of that, to mitigate the risk of a cyber attack. So the first thing we're going to look at here is the compromise of the computer system. Systems may be compromised due to lack of effective protections. You will want to talk about putting a procedure in place to include firewalls, strong password policies, dual login, update antivirus, and system patches. And you'll want to educate your staff about email attachments and the risk of using external storage devices. Now, you're probably saying, well, our university already has all this stuff in place, and you probably do, but you need to have it in writing. And the bigger piece of it is we need to educate our staff about some of this stuff. They don't need to know all the little technical nuances, but they need to know what they have to look for when they're opening attachments or using their external storage devices, what they have to look for, what they have to do to protect the computer that they're using. Unauthorized access, both internal and external, will be a risk. Why? Well, the internal staffing, they need to have procedures, and if they don't have the procedures, it's a risk. So the procedure for function-based permissions should be in place so that there's a policy that only users may access permissions for only what is required for their job function. And externally, there should be a procedure for locking the computer when you're not physically at it. So when the staff member walks away, there should be a rule that says, hey, before you walk away from your computer, lock it down, Control-Alt-Delete, or maybe you install those timed screensavers so that after 3 minutes or 5 minutes or whatever, the screensaver comes up and you have to re-authenticate to open your computer screen. This is going to help prevent from keyloggers, virus uploads, and the physical removal of data. So some other risks, unauthorized access. It will be helpful to have practices of dual login, so a key fob and a password required. I know at Caltech we have this. It seemed a little cumbersome when they first implemented it, but now it's just kind of normal. I mean, we have this for other third parties that we use where we log in and then they ask us to press the little fob and get a security number and type it in. So it's just another way of authenticating it so that there are two methods. Also, if the university doesn't already have this policy, you'll want to have this in your program, a policy of smart passwords. So 6 characters long, containing both numeric and alpha characters. And I always say abstain from the use of pet names. Now, they've always had the rule kind of stay away from your family names. They're just really easy for people to guess. But now more people have, little loving pets, not necessarily therapy pets, but just their substitute children, and just another member of the family. So we just want to make sure that we abstain from using our pet names also.
Could I jump in for 1 second, Ruth?
Yes.
So thank you for mentioning this, of course. I just wanted to mention that we had a fellow speak at our conference last year from the IT department at University of Nevada, Las Vegas, and he was just fascinating. And he also did it in a webinar on this subject, on this whole IT cybersecurity. And one of the things he mentioned regarding passwords, Mark, you might mention it about the smart way you save your passwords now.
Yeah, well, first of all, one of the things that he discussed, which I know I went through and changed my passwords so that they aren't names, they aren't numbers. And one of the things he suggested is find your favorite song and pick a line out of it. Something that you would remember, and you might, if the word 2 was there, use the number 2, or 4 the number 4, and so that it becomes a longer password, but it's one that you remember quite simply. And this is something that I have found that I changed a lot of my passwords, and no matter what the requirement was, it's accepted everywhere. And it's something that's hard to break, because even if someone knows you, do they know your favorite song? Do they know the right line? And do they know the physical changes that you made, whether it's capitals or whether it's numbers? So passwords are something that should be changed and should be not what we all started out doing is very typical. And
well, thank you for sharing that. That's quite clever.
Okay, and I also wanted to, just on the last slide, one of the reasons to go over it every year is people change, computer systems change, and these things have to be brought up and refreshed for people. Now I'm back on mute.
Thank you. The other thing he mentioned was not using the same password for every website, because if a hacker finds one, they find all of them. He also talked about using a wallet. You could have one password that would unlock all of your other passwords. And as much as I didn't like that idea, he really explained it in a way that makes sense. But anyway, that cybersecurity webinar is on our website under past webinars, and you can access there. But I'll go back and pass it back to you, Ruth.
Thank you. Those are actually really great tips. I like them. I especially like this one about the favorite song, using the number 2 or 4 for some of those words. So when we're talking about the password, your program should have a policy to change the password periodically. Now, there isn't a specified number of days in the safeguard rules, but I'm saying anywhere between 30 to 90 days. The issue is you don't want the password change so often that it becomes cumbersome for your staff, and they start finding workarounds like taping the password to the bottom of the keyboard or something like that. So see what works best. I would maybe just start in the middle of that, you know, I don't know, 45 days and see what happens. Make sure that everybody remembers to change their passwords and that you don't find them, you know, placing the password on the computer screen or under the keyboard. And of course, the strict policy enforce for never sharing passwords. So another risk, interception of data. Maintain a policy against encrypted sensitive data. Use current industry recommended encryption certificates and keys. Examples of secure delivery may include encrypted email, delivery to secure file location on a third-party server, or use of a Dropbox. Again, this is something you're going to want to check in with your IT and your CIO. They will have a specific way that they feel is best. Also, you want to mitigate the risks for the corruption of data and the system. So how can that happen? Well, it can be, your system can be hijacked for ransom, or there could be a disaster, whether it's a natural disaster, like an earthquake here in California. I shouldn't say that too loud. Or you know, some other disaster where, you know, a truck hits the building and wipes out the system. So the policy would be to maintain a backup system, secure it, should be standalone, preferably off-site location for storage of the backup data. And the off-site, of course, may also include the cloud. And then another risk that we'll want to mitigate and we'll want to put in our safeguard rules program would be unauthorized transfer of data by third parties. So you'll want to create a third-party cyber policy. You'll want to ensure that your third party performs pen testing on their firewall or penetration testing. You'll want to consider a router with built-in network security. Also, there are going to be some administrative issues that you'll want to that you will want to ensure are in your safeguard rules program. So you'll want a policy to perform background checks, to review references prior to hiring, to require university confidentiality agreements to be signed by all. Usually those will be implemented, these three things anyways, through the hiring process or your HR. And if that's how your university operates, then you'll want to include an HR person in your program planning or on your team. And then a policy to educate the staff about identifying and reporting. Again, you want to make sure that all the staff understand what the rules are. So you'll want to either train managers who will train staff, which I found is the most effective way, or you'll just want to have an assembly where you pull everybody in and you go through the information. But sometimes if you can do it in departments and kind of compartmentalize it, then people have the opportunity to ask questions and understand the procedures a little better. All right, so what do you do if you do have a breach? You have to report it. So you will immediately contact your supervisor unless your university has a different policy. Here at Caltech, our staff members would tell their supervisor. The supervisor would contact either a chief information officer, a campus security, internal auditors, the controller, maybe just the IT team. It depends on what the breach is. So again, you'll want to work with your team to find out how your university will want to handle that. All right, let's talk about the GLBA red flag rules. And this is one of my favorite programs, probably because I was tasked with overseeing it. And I really like that this program is it's developed to help and to protect our customers who are the students that have these loans, right? I like that because I too had a student loan when I was younger, and unlike many, I'm kind of one of those worrywart people, and I always wondered what they did with all my information. And now, when my daughter went to school, I didn't have to worry about what they were doing because I knew there were rules out there to protect her information. All right, so when we implement the procedures to protect our customers, we're going to set a policy and assign a manager for maintaining compliance, similar to the safeguard rules, right? We're going to identify departments on campus who create and administer the covered accounts. Again, same as the safeguard rules. But when we administer the program to those departments and train our staff and implement the procedures and so forth, we are going to want to make sure that our staff also know how to process a claim for identity theft. In California, there are specific rules that we have to follow, and we're going to be talking about that. And then we're going to review and update our policy and procedure annually, and we're going to tweak it based off of, you know, what has changed in our working areas, and what we have to do to further protect our customers. So you're always going to be evaluating your processes and making sure that they're safe for your customer. And when I say safe for the customer, I'm talking about, again, their personally identifiable information being protected. So here are a whole page of rules, and I've actually got a couple pages that we're going to go through, and we are going to be just going down the checklist. If you have questions or you want to look back at this again, just know you can type your questions in. And tell me again, Scott, which area are our listeners going to be typing into?
Which areas are our listeners? Oh, yeah, into the questions panel.
The questions panel. Okay. I just wanted to make sure if they have questions, we are going to go through this, these rules kind of quickly. If they have questions, they can go ahead and type their question in. And
yes,
then, okay, great. And then also, these slides will be available as well as later when we get into these rules for reporting identity theft, those handouts will be available so that we can go ahead and you can refer to those.
Yeah, and you know, those will be so necessary because it's so much information here. Talking about the policies, it seems to open up so much, which we don't have a lot of questions because it's just so much information coming in. That you got the policies with GLB, which ties into red flags, which ties into identity theft. So we could do, and we have webinars on our websites specifically for identity theft, you know, shredding material and all these things you're going to talk about, and then cybersecurity. So focusing that this is going to be the cornerstone of where you're going to set your policies and procedures. But these are the systemic things and the tied-in issues that are all going to tie into your policies. So appreciate it, and hopefully you have a good breath because there's just so much here. But we're going to make sure that you're supported. And Ruth has really taken her time to make sure that you're going to be given the information. The information that's in these slides, you're going to want to keep it to refer back to because, I mean, just to look at this presentation, I don't think anyone could possibly just absorb it all. You're going to want to go back, and then the templates that we're going to provide you afterwards to help you build or improve upon your policy, you're going to find invaluable. So with that, let me pass it back to you, and you can start with this. If people have questions, please ask questions as you go, or if you want to follow up with email questions, we'll take those from you as well.
Right, and yes, everybody hold on. We're going to go through the list. This is a very robust presentation with a lot of information, as Scott just alluded to. So we look forward to questions, and we look forward to, after you receive all of your handouts and information, if you have questions, feel free to email back. So for our GLBA red flag rules implementation, of course, the first thing is you're going to want to follow your university's policies. But with that in mind, you're going to want to do the following things. So paper documents, files, electronic media, electronic data, backups, they should all be stored in locked containers in locked rooms. Access to keys to these secured areas should be limited to employees with a legitimate need. You don't want to hang your key on the wall and say, you know, secured waste can. You don't want people to realize that that's what the key's for. Employees should not leave sensitive information unattended for their at their workstations. No visitors should be allowed unescorted access to the office. So most of our offices, they have like for the bursar's office, they have like a little counter, or even the registrar's office. So we don't want to invite people behind the counters unless, we have that information behind the counter contained where people can't just have access to it. No visitors should, we already talked about that. No visitors should be allowed unescorted access to the office. Personally identifiable information sent externally should be encrypted and password protected. That means if you're sending out emails and you have your students' information on that email, if it's personally identifiable, it's a name, it's an address, it's a phone number, it's information about what they paid, it has social security number on it, you're going to want to just, put a password encryption on that, make it Adobe and put a password. If you're sending files for loan items, of course, they're going to want to all be encrypted. And you're just going to want to make sure that if the stuff is sitting on your desk and you have workers and people coming in and out, that you use the folder method. Everything goes in a folder stacked on your desk, and when you're not at your desk, it goes in a locked drawer behind you. Okay, industry standards for electronic data security should be followed. Electronic equipment and storage devices should be appropriately erased or purged of data.
Let me jump in just real quick if I could.
Yeah.
If I could. So we had a question that came up, and I think it's just an appropriate time. The question is, do you have recommendations for third-party training for staff members on identity theft? The answer is yes. One, so that the last page we're just discussing is all relevant to identity theft, about securing data so that those personally identifiable pieces of information cannot be stolen and used for those purposes, number one. Number two, we have a webinar on our website. It's on the student side of our website, which you can incorporate into your policy, but it's specifically regarding identity theft, shredding, receipts, those types of things, sharing passwords, as well as, and I'll include this in our follow-up, so this is a good question. The Federal Trade Commission also has information and training on identity theft, as well as our webinar on security to avoid having your information stolen electronically. So electronically, there's safeguard rules at your work, and then there's personally identifiable information that you have on your person, such as mail. We talk about this in our webinar about thieves who steal information from your garbage cans. So shredding or burning information from your receipts at the grocery store. We did an example in Las Vegas, just to give you a breather, about receipts. When you go to the grocery store now, you have to belong to their secret club or you don't get the discount. So what's the first thing they ask you? They ask you what your phone number is. Well, you want to be careful. You want to key that into a keypad. I went to a drugstore and they wouldn't let me do it. They wanted me to say it out loud. Well, what if the person behind you is writing that information down, and then you walk out of the store and drop your receipt in the trash can, and they call you up, and that receipt has the last 4 digits of your credit card number, a purchase that you can identify with, and they could fool you into thinking that they're your bank and they know information about you. So we talk about that in our website. So I'll follow up with you in our follow-up to this presentation with information on training for identity theft, which is a key component, of course, in the presentation that we're giving today. Thanks for letting me jump in there to answer that question.
Oh, yes, thank you. Thanks so much, Scott. Okay, so we want to also implement procedures and make sure that contracts with affected service providers should require that they comply with the red flag rules and that they have appropriate policies and procedures in place to identify, detect, mitigate, and prevent identity theft. They should be, the third-party providers should be able to tell you what their policy is or give you a copy of it. They may have you sign a non-disclosure agreement, but they still should be able to provide you with that information, even in the RFP process. You'll want to exercise appropriate and effective oversight of service provider agreements. So oversight may include a review of service providers' own red flag rules, as we just mentioned, and requirements that service providers notify your university of any security breaches. And this is really important. If there is a security breach and it does affect any of your students, you'll always want to be notified, and you'll want to put a timeline for that notification in your contract with them. In other words, we want to be notified in 48 hours. Sometimes the third parties or people that you might have contracts with might want to delay the notification because maybe they want to gather more information about it. You'll want to talk with your legal department about how they feel about that, because sometimes it's best to know what the situation is, even if you don't have all the details. All right, so departments that communicate with credit reporting agencies or the third-party agencies shall follow procedures for reporting of address or other information discrepancies between the school and the contracted third party when the school has an established continuing relationship with the consumer or borrower. The school regularly and in ordinary course of business furnishes information to the school's third party or reporting agency. And then the information shall not be provided to outside agencies for which the school has no contract. So that's a really important point to make to your staff members. And we're going to talk more about that when we get toward the student part and when we're talking about the pretexting protection. And then finally, requests for information from non-contracted agents should be initiated by the student loan recipient and requested in writing with a wet signature to the school. No fax request, no email request should be accepted. It's very important. Oops, did we go one too many here? Let's see. All right. There we go. All right, so it's great to have all these rules in place, but what are you looking for? What does a red flag look like? Well, it may look like account activity that appears inconsistent with the usual activity pattern. So maybe somebody pays $100 every month toward their account, and all of a sudden there's a huge payment on it and then a refund. That would be a flag to me. I'd wonder why there's money kind of being funneled through that account like that. Notification by an account holder of charges not made by him or her. That seems like a flag to me. Hi, this isn't my transaction. I never put that extra $500 on my account, and I certainly didn't ask for the refund. How about account access has been compromised? Okay, that is definitely a red flag. The account application that appears to have been altered. So we'll want to look at those account applications to see if it looks like somebody's written over something, changed some information like an address. Identification documents that appear to have been altered and are not consistent with the appearance of the person claiming to be the existing customer. Now that we have to really take a second look at. We here have students that are transitioning their identity, and we have to be very sensitive to that, but we also have to make sure that if the ID card does not match the student, if they don't look the same in the picture or the name is different from the name in the account, that we ask questions, and the questions should be tactful. For example, I noticed that your picture looks different. Have you updated your card lately? Obviously, they haven't. Let me check with the card office on this. Let me check with the registrar's office on this. You just have to be extremely tactful and very respectful, but we also have to make sure that we're not allowing people to access the accounts when their photos or their names don't match what's in our system.
Can I ask you a question, Ruth?
Sure.
So, you know, when you change your address, you're required to get a new driver's license, I think, within 2 weeks. Do you
Right.
think it would be reasonable to have a policy in place on a campus to say that if you change your name or if you dramatically alter your appearance, that it's required that you update your student identification on campus?
You know, I think it's reasonable. I know, Scott, our institute has had many conversations about that. And, you know, again, we just have to be very careful not to treat people differently. So our rule is if the ID card is so worn that you can't see the face on it, then you go down and get a new card. It doesn't matter who you are. If your picture doesn't match your appearance, like some of our students, they come in as freshmen and they have a freshman picture and they're in year
Mm-hmm.
3 and now they've dramatically changed, right?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe they've grown facial hair. Maybe they've just gotten
Right.
more worry lines, you know? We ask them to get an updated photo, you know, and we just, again, when you ask, you have to be really politically correct and make sure that you're respectful. You know, I've noticed
Right.
that there's a significant change between the person on this card and you. When was the last time you had your card updated? You may want to do that.
Right.
It would be a lot easier to say you should update your card every year, or, you know, or if you have dramatically changed, but I'm not sure we're at that place yet. We're still having those conversations. And then same with the mhm.
Yeah, if I may mention, there are some schools that do require a new ID card and picture every year, and the reason is exactly what you're saying, because hair colors change, hair
Yes.
lengths change, facial hair changes, people mature, and
Right.
and sometimes the picture on the ID looks nothing like the person. Um, I know some schools do require a yearly update of your ID card. It's something I think most schools should start to consider, because if you look at people today and 4 years ago, especially in a college situation, hair color, hair length, facial hair, weight, it could be many different things. It's something that if we are going to hand somebody information, we should be sure that's who we're talking to. Okay.
Thank you. I agree. Okay, so what a red flag looks like continued, we want to talk about a person's social security number or a student ID number that is the same as another account holder's social security number or ID number. So most likely our systems, I don't know about all schools, but systems can have typographical errors, just typos. Our information comes from the registrar office and flows into our module. So if they made a typo error and then we advanced a loan under a student's social security number and the number in the system doesn't match the student, we start by going back to the registrar's office. But again, this is what a red flag may look like. That would be considered a red flag. That's something you'll definitely want to do more investigative work on. A person's identifying information is not consistent with the information from Human Resources or the registrar's office, again, what I just mentioned. If you suspect the validity of an address change request for an existing covered account. So, you know, if you just talked to a student the other day and all of a sudden their address is, you know, out of state, that's kind of weird. And you might wonder, well, I thought they were in school here. I wonder why their address is out of state. Why aren't they using, maybe they are not living in the off-campus housing anymore around the corner. You may want to just talk to them and find out what's going on. Another kind of address inconsistency is, you know, if you see a lot of changes of address, or the other thing we should also be mindful when we're looking at addresses is we should just say, has it been changed or updated? So every time you're in the student account, it's a good practice to just look at the address history, and especially when the students are getting ready to exit, right? Ask the questions. Is this where you're going to be? Do you plan on making changes? Because if the student says, well, I'm here and I'm continuing on for grad school, if you have a small school like Caltech, those things will stick in your mind. If you have a school with 40,000 students, maybe this isn't the best practice, but you should look for any kind of erratic address changes. Also, computer system breaches. If the system is compromised or if there is unauthorized account access by outside entities or even by staff, those are red flags. And then a claim by a customer that they may be a victim of identity theft. That's definitely a red flag. All right. My word. Here we go. So let's talk a little bit before I move on to the responses to the red flags. Let's talk a little bit about pretext protection. So pretext just is like to hide the truth. It's like a false reason given to cancel a truth. So it's an unauthorized request for data, such as pretext calling. So it's kind of like what Scott was talking about earlier with the receipt. It's when somebody has part of the account holder's data and they call you and they try to authenticate that they are actually the account holder. And one of the reasons they may want to do that with your student account is they might want to get either more information about the student, claiming that they forgot, so that they have that additional information to somehow use that fraudulently, maybe for medical benefits or something. Another reason is they might try to process a refund from that account. And if they're able to authenticate or they have enough information, they've tricked you into telling them the rest of it, then they can do this. They can authenticate and get that refund. So we don't want that to happen. So request all account holders to authenticate. Require a written request if the request doesn't come in your office, like from somebody walking in. You'll want something in writing with a wet signature. We never want to accept third-party requests. And I know this can be difficult when students are trying to rent a place off campus, but the student needs to come in and get the letter from you that says, you know, Johnny has a current account and he pays $500 regularly a month, or whatever information the student, Johnny, is asking for. He needs to come into your office to ask for it. We don't want to fax it over to a stranger. We don't want to accept a signed fax or a letter from a third party saying, Johnny has contacted me and he's asking me to validate or authenticate this information. Okay. So now let's go ahead and let's talk about responses to a red flag. So what do you do when you see one of these red flags? Well, there are several things. You can continue to monitor an account for evidence of identity theft, right? Because you want to see, is that really a problem? You can investigate it, contact the customer. I usually do a pretty thorough investigation when we think something's wrong. We try to check everything first before we point the finger. You can change passwords and security codes when there's a breach, or you can suspend or close an account, or you can reopen an account with a new account number depending on what the situation is. You can request additional documentation to validate identity. Again, if it's a pretext call, you don't want to do that. And then notify law enforcement, right? Depending on what it is, you may have to file a claim, and we're going to talk about that next. And then determine that no response is warranted under a particular situation. Like you might determine that, oh, it doesn't appear, it might appear that there was a red flag, but there isn't really a problem. So now, if you are in the state of California, there is a rule for responding to, or regulation responding to a claim of identity theft or possibility of identity theft. And here are the rules. I like to call it the 10-day rule because, as you'll see on this slide and the next one, there are a lot of 10 days in there. But the debt collector shall start an investigation within 10 days of receiving the customer's claim of identity theft. So because we only have 10 days to start that investigation, it's recommended that we ask for a dispute and the required documents in writing. I'm going to tell you what those documents are. The required documents include the police report. Again, what I had mentioned earlier, you may have to initiate a police report. A written statement. Let me back up. When I say you may have to require a police report, that was if you were responding to a red flag. If the person says, I believe that identity theft has occurred here, or that I'm a victim of identity theft, you being the school or the debt collector, has to start the investigation. But you can't really start your investigation until the victim has done certain things. So they have to give us documents. One of the documents is they have to give us a statement in writing that says, I have been a victim of identity theft, or I believe that I may be a victim of identity theft. They have to file a police report. They have to make a written statement. They have to forward all the correspondence that's received. And if they have any kind of like proof or documentation, they have to get all of that over to us so that we can send that over to our legal department. And then it's recommended that we conduct follow-up correspondence in writing. So Scott is going to provide to you some letters, 5 correspondent templates. 3 are letters that they were first created by the CAC. They're available at the presentation. I've since updated them, but they include the initial contact letter to the student. They include a document request saying, and send us such and such documents. There's a list. There's a claim denial letter. So if we find no proof of identity theft, we send out a claim denial letter. If we do find that identity theft has occurred from all the information we've received in our investigation, we have a letter template for that we have accepted that there's a claim of identity theft and that we've notified the creditor, the credit reporting agency, and the creditor. So those 5 templates are going to be really valuable, and especially if you live in the state of California, where that Identity Theft Resolution Act went into effect in 2017. Okay.
Yeah, even if you don't live in the state of California, it's just excellent policy and procedure about communicating with a student that has asserted a claim of identity theft.
Oh, I agree. It's nice to have those templates because they're very clear and concise communication about the situation.
Yeah.
Okay, so here are some responsibilities of the debt collector. Again, us, the school. We have to, if this identity theft occurs, we have to cease collection of the debt upon receipt of the police report being received. We have to notify the credit reporting agency of the dispute within 10 days. Again, this is my 10-day rule. Everything has to happen in 10 days. We have to send a notice of our investigation determination to the debtor no later than 10 business days after concluding the review. And we have to notify the credit reporting agency to delete information no later than 10 days after making the determination to stop the collection activity. So these are things that must be adhered to in a timely fashion. It's very important that you keep your list in front of you and your templates. Finally, the law prohibits selling the debt if the creditor has received notice that the debt collector has terminated debt collection activities due to a claim of identity theft. So that's a lot of information. I see that we're already at noon. I want to run through building student awareness. I'm going to just go through a couple of slides here, Scott, and then talk a little bit about the checklist to follow. So let's get.
Yeah, I think you're just fine. If anybody needs to exit early, you have an appointment. The recording will be available afterwards. And thank you very much for attending. And Ruth, please take as much time as you need. I think it's such a valuable topic.
Okay, great. Thank you, Scott. And thank you, listeners, for hanging in there. As Scott did say, this is a very robust presentation. It has a lot of information. I hope that this information will help you as you go forward and put together your programs, your GLBA programs that are regulatory requirements, and that you will also get some valuable benefit from this student awareness section that we're going to talk about right now. So students, they need information, and here's the how and the why of what they need to know. Students may or may not understand that once they're away from home and they're out in the university or living on their own, that they're victims, right? I mean, they're still victims at home, but they're kind of under their parents' umbrella. And once they get out and they start making credit purchases and making loans, buying cars, or doing anything in the finance world, they're subject to fraud, right? Identity theft. So how do the bad guys get the information? Well, they go into the trash. They go online and fish for information from our students and us, frankly. And students need to understand that also by leaving their personal information around, or which includes leaving it in a mailbox, even a school mailbox, it makes them vulnerable to having some identity theft occur if people steal their mail. So why would people even want to do this? Again, students, they're not aware that people want to get their information so that they can commit credit card fraud, that they can counterfeit documents like ID. They can get medical services using that student's name and information, or they can use it to cash paychecks. So I believe if we share this information with the students and then we provide them with checklists or ways to protect that information, it's really going to add value. So we're partnering with the student. Here at the university, we are protecting their information. We want to make sure their data doesn't get stolen out of our systems. So we safeguard our systems with our cybersecurity safeguard rules. And then we protect their information in paper form with the red flag rules and their account information with the red flag rules. And then to top it off, we share this information with our students in a financial literacy luncheon. And it just helps them so that when they go out into the real world after they leave school, they're going to be able to know how to take care of themselves. They're going to know how to protect themselves, and they'll have the right questions to ask, right? So we want to go ahead, Scott.
Yeah, I was just going to suggest two things. One, it's a good reminder that the more problems your student has, I mean, it pays to educate them, because the more problems they have, the more problems you're going to have. Because as soon as a student is a victim of identity theft because they left their mail laying around their dorm room and some other person took it and opened up a Netflix account, they're going to immediately come running to you because their parents don't live there, but you do.
That's correct.
So Maria asked a question. She asked, can you please show the slides of the responsibilities of the debt collector again? I'm going to send out the presentation. Maria, if you have questions on it, give me a call along with the templates that go along with that slide that have to do with the collector's responsibility. But that was that. Back to you.
Thank you. Okay, so let's help our students. Let's educate them. We'll give them these lists. We'll teach them to lock their financial documents and records in a safe place. When they're at work, to store their wallet or their purse in a safe place, and also to keep information secure from roommates or workers who come into your home. You know, anymore, it's not really about trust, it's about practice. You may trust your roommate, you may trust your neighbor, but what if there's an arbitrary worker or just somebody who comes to your door who's giving you a sales pitch? Do you want your Social Security number, you know, in your hand, and you're holding a paper and you don't even realize it when the person is talking to you at the door? It's just the way of the world. We just don't want to give anybody a temptation. So let's practice these.
Ruth, it's Mark. I just wanted to mention two things before you get through and sum up. One, something a lot of the students do is share passwords. that's something that they should be told they don't do. Because if they share it with somebody who then has a fight with them and gives it to other people, it opens up access to a lot of things.
Oh, that's a really good point.
Okay. The other thing is when you're a worker in one of our departments and you suspect this, there's nothing wrong with erring on the side of caution. You should report any suspect to your supervisor, and it should go to a red flag representative on campus to protect yourself if it is real. And I'll just leave you at that. Go ahead, finish up.
Thank you, Mark. Very important points. Okay, so back to our students, we want to encourage them to limit what they carry and let them know that when they go out, they should take only identification, credit or debit card that they may need. Leave their Social Security card locked up at home. Now, this is tricky because some of our students are traveling from other states into school, but if they're not going to need their Social Security card and they have a safe deposit box or, a safe place at home with their folks, that might be the best place for that card. And again, we just have to emphasize to students to guard their Social Security number and ask questions before deciding to share it. So it's okay to say, what are you going to use this for? How are you going to protect it? Will you be shredding that information after you're done with it? So, what happens to it what happens if I don't provide that Social Security card number? And then let the students know before they share personal information, ask again why it's needed and how it will be safeguarded. They don't have to get upset about it or anxious or say it rudely, which I know sometimes students get defensive when they're asking those kind of questions. What I've shared with our students is it's best to just take a business tone and just let them know that you're concerned, not just about your safety, but everybody's. So when you ask for that Social Security number, what are you using it for? Oh, you have to use it to report my student loan. I see. So are you going to be storing that in a paper form? Oh, you are. Is that going to be locked up somewhere? Because I'm kind of concerned that's my Social Security. Oh, you do lock that up. Okay. So those are important conversations for students to ask. Also, when the student is at our counter, if they want hard copies of their loan documentation, which will have their Social Security number on it, we will put the information in a sealed envelope and hand it to them and remind them that this has your Social Security number on it. You need to keep it safe. All right, so some more of our student checklists. Limit the amount of information that they post online about themselves. Oh my word, social media, people are able to get so much information about students off of that. This says the information can be used to answer challenge questions on your accounts, to get access to your banking, your personal information, and to limit your access of your networking page to personal friends only. Do not post personally identifiable information such as your full name, your Social Security number, your address, your phone number, or your account numbers. I just want to share a personal little side story here. A friend of ours, the daughter and her husband had bought a new house. They went out and took a picture at the new house. There was the address right there in the photo. And then the gal had her middle name on the Facebook page. So between her name, her middle name, that, and references about her pet and the pet's name, they ended up having an issue with some identity theft. So students, I can't emphasize this enough, students don't really understand the issue that they could run into here. So if you are having one of your lunch and learns and you're sharing information about identity theft, please make sure you talk to your students about information and how it can be used in the whole social media environment, how it can be accessed. Also, use a security software by installing an antivirus and an anti-spyware software. I think most students know about that. I don't know that they take the time to do it, so we need to share that with them, share with them to keep security patches updated, use password protection. Also, in order to avoid spyware or a computer virus, do not open files, click on links, or download programs that are sent from an unfamiliar source. So easy, actually, for all of us to just go in and click, click, click. Sorry, folks, I just flipped through that a little fast. This is really important. When logging in at the library, the coffee shop, or another public place, use a Wi-Fi connection. Be aware that an encrypted website only protects information that you send. A secure wireless network protects all of the information on that network. A lock icon on the status bar of your internet browser means your information will be safe when it's transmitted. Look for the lock before you send personal or financial information online. So these kind of things I think are going to be really valuable to our students. Scott will have two handouts. It's actually probably in one PDF, but it's a student checklist. One is for securing their information online, and the other one is just for securing their personal information. They're both valuable. They're great handouts to give away at the Lunch and Learn. Here's some more information for securing online information for your students. Avoid maintaining personal information on a laptop. If you need to store personal information on a laptop, then protect it with a passcode and refrain from using the autofill features or selecting the remember this passcode option. And I know this is really, you know, a lot of students want to use those autofill features. They have it on Chrome. It makes it so easy. And then you click remember your passcode and you don't have to worry about carrying around your passcodes or remembering them. But it just makes it so easy for those folks that steal laptops to get in and get your information. And then before you dispose of a computer, make sure it's wiped, that you wipe the utility program to overwrite the hard drive. And before you dispose of a mobile device, check the owner's manual or the manufacturer's website for information on how to delete that information permanently after you've transferred information to your new device. And also remove the SIM card. And we talked earlier for our staff members and our cybersecurity program about using strong passwords. Let's talk to our students about that too. Strong passwords for their laptops, their credit, their bank online sites, and other accounts. And also, there is a full list of information, and there's an article, and it's over on the FTC's site, Federal Trade Commission, how to keep your information secure. That will have a lot of additional information. These lists that I've put together are the things that I've observed or in talking to our students that would be most helpful to them. So you might want to use these lists for starters. And then what happens when a student or somebody comes to you and says, hey, identity theft has happened? What can they do if they're a victim? So they want to contact the credit reporting agency to put a fraud alert on their account. They want to file a police report. They want to close any inappropriate accounts, and then contact their creditors in writing. And you can give this information to your students. I also keep it up in our bursar office in case, you know, somebody comes in and they're concerned. It's really valuable information for people to have. And then here are the credit reporting agencies. Again, this has nothing to do with us reporting or our subscriber code or anything. This is just if somebody has an issue with identity theft, they'll want to contact the reporting agencies and let them know. So we like to keep these numbers also handy. And also, the Federal Trade Commission has reporting identity theft at this link. It's actually the checklist of what the victim needs to do. And so I like to also have that available so that people have that information if they're in that situation. I think when somebody is a victim of identity theft, they're just overtaken with fear and shock. And the more information and steps that we can provide to them to help them, guide them through the process, makes it a lot easier for that situation. It helps
I
them
think
get
they
through
are,
it.
Ruth. It's shocking to a lot of people. They're upset. And I get it sometimes that students call in and we tell them about an account, we report to them that they have an account, and they say it's not mine, it was an identity theft, and they immediately find it's someone else's responsibility. That, well, you need to fix that, well, you need to do this. And one thing I try to gently remind a customer is that if they were a victim of identity theft, that I'm sorry that they were a victim of a crime. But as someone who is a victim of a crime, they have some responsibility to report that information so that people can investigate that information, that without their assistance, they may just continue to suffer the effects of that crime. And that sometimes helps them understand that, yes, I was a victim, and then they'll want to be more proactive. But sometimes the knee-jerk reaction is, you better get this fixed.
That's correct. That's correct.
Yeah,
we experience that in our daily lives when we hear about people that are just victims of anything. Hey, my account has a wrong charge on it, you better get it fixed. Well, is it a wrong charge, or did you think that you were on the anytime plan when you bought that piece of food instead of the regular meal plan? So you're right, they do get very upset, and they're expecting us to fix it, and they do have a responsibility. And having these resources, folks, out there available is very leveling for them. It helps them move forward in the process. All right, well, these are some other references where I've got some of our information for today's presentation. One of the things that you see noted on there is NACUBO. So the NACUBO Student Financial Services Committee did work on a template, and it is out available on their site. And I've given it to Scott and asked him to go ahead and send that out as well. That template is to help you put together your safeguard rules plan, which is your cybersecurity plan. Also, he will have some other forms. I don't know if you want to show those handouts right now, Scott.
I'm sorry, yes, I had to get off mute. We are at the part of your presentation. So yeah, so I've got these documents that you have in your folder here. One is the Gramm-Leach-Bliley template that was created by NACUBO, and we're going to send it to you in a Word document, so you can easily insert your information and just improve upon or begin your GLB security program.
Right. I think
along
it's
with
a great. Sorry.
Yeah,
I was just going to recommend. I think it's a great template to start with when you're putting together your cybersecurity program or your safeguards program. Start with this template and work with the different departments to put in their components, and then of course have your OGC look at it to make sure it represents what your university would like in the way of a policy.
We also have the other templates here, these letter correspondence that were originally produced by the CAC. The first one, the second, third, fourth, there's a good red flag policies and procedures template. And by the way, if you need help writing policies and procedures, it's something that we can do for you here. It's also an area we're going to talk about at our conference, Cruise into Collections in Las Vegas, on writing policies and procedures to make effective policies and procedures. And there's also a student checklist of information here that Ruth has been kind enough to provide as well.
Okay. Well, that looks like we are giving them just a little bit of everything so that they can have a complete package here for their GLBA compliance. This is going to be, again, important in the fall when our auditors are there looking at our Title IV requirements.
And let me just point you to a couple of other resources here. So on the Second Alliance website, secondalliance.com, here's a couple for you. Under the student side of our website, and thank you all for hanging in there, we're going to be done real short here. On the student side of our website, under webinars here, we have an excellent webinar on right here, preventing identity theft. So on identity theft, we talk about shredding and documents and personal information and trash and phishing and all those different ways that it gets done. On our website, also here under financial literacy, students can access, and you can use these links to copies of their credit report, where you can obtain a free copy of your credit report and sample credit reports here so you can learn to understand them. As well as on our university side, you can enter here under, you can go under past webinars, and I mentioned that there's this cybersecurity. Let me just find it. So cybersecurity right here, this was done by Vito Rocco at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas. So excellent resource there. In fact, such an interesting topic, identity theft. I think that we'll continue this topic on next month's Collector's Corner. It's the second Wednesday of every month. And let's talk about identity theft along with other things that are happening in addition to a follow-up discussion on California's Assembly Bill 1313, which would prohibit you from withholding transcripts from a student. So our colleague at Marianne Lauer has forged together some templates that we want to distribute to you to sign and perhaps send to California Assembly persons and representatives to talk about 1313 and how it affects your school. So let me answer this question. We have one other question here, Ruth, and let me pass this to you and I. We can answer this, and Mark as well. Is there additional steps we should do for those that were victims of student loan fraud? So we talked about some of them that, when someone's a victim of student loan fraud, if they are actually a victim of student loan fraud, I think you addressed many of them in there. One, if it was a victim of fraud, the credit reporting, advising the credit reporting of obviously making reversals if that student wasn't responsible. Is there anything you could think outside of the presentation that another responsibility internally in the school for those who were, in fact, a victim of student loan fraud?
Well, actually, Scott, when we think of that, we have to think about whether this fraud is going to be pertaining to federal loans, right? Mm-hmm. Or school loans. I mean, we have to look at all of the did the school go out of business? Is that what they mean by fraud? Can we ask that question? Because what I'm getting at is, we have to look at our financial responsibilities with regard to triggering acts.
Yeah, I agree with Ruth. I just say someone who's a victim of student loan fraud, you need a little bit more definition. You can point them to all the helplines of getting and reporting and working through. But I don't know what more we can do, because we are not the lawyer. We are not the a person that they, of course, got the loans from. So you're going to have to talk about, and in most cases, this is someone took out a loan in their name. And this is something they have to go through and file out the procedures, where this came from, how it happened, and verify they are not that person.
Yeah, and let me just mention from my experience, because this is an excellent question. Number one, as Ruth mentioned, you have to have policies and procedures in place. But now, what do you do when it really happens? So from my experience, it happens a couple of ways. The easiest one I see is Pell Grants. A ring of thieves or thieves sign up for school, get a Pell Grant, overfunds the account, take a refund, take that check to a check cashing place, cash that check, run away. Now we're trying to collect a Pell Grant from someone and they never attended a class. So what do you do in that case? Well, one, you want to conduct a reasonable investigation with the letter templates, contact the student. Our records reflect that you have this account. If they say, well, this is not my account, then we'd want to probably provide them proof of the account so they know what to report to the police department. Well, here's a copy of the Pell Grant. Here's a copy of your student account, so that they can take it to the police department and show that I took out this Pell Grant. give it back to you so that you can conduct a reasonable investigation. And if it shows that they were not the person that took that account out, that you can have your police department or work with local authorities to find out, is there a thief or a ring of thieves that has targeted your university for some pickings? So they're trying to pick away at your Pell Grant program. The other fraud I've seen, and it's unusual, of course, that someone would sit through 3 years worth of classes to pick up that education when it's not really them. But what I see once in a while is student loan documents, promissory notes that were signed by mom.
Oh.
What do you do? So we have a bunch of direct loans and an institutional loan. The student says, those aren't mine, and I'm not responsible for them, and I don't have to pay. My mom signed those, or someone else signed those, and you find out, well, they didn't sign those. So what can you do? Well, you could reverse the direct loans. You could reduce if you had a Perkins or an institutional loan. Of course, you'd have to advise your customer that if you did, in fact, take the classes, you're still responsible for those classes. So I might hint that, well, if you left them as student loans, if your mom signed for them, you'd be paying them at 3.75% rather than whatever interest rate on a defaulted tuition account here is in California or wherever you are. And do you want to proceed a police report if this is a family member that did? So I see that happen once in a while, that kind of fraud. So policy and procedure in place.
Yes. I was going to say those are really, really good points too. When you're talking fraud, I'm thinking of like the borrower defense rules, the repayments and regulations when schools close and they're for profit and a fraudulent act has occurred in that situation.
Yeah.
So,
yeah,
but yeah, I totally get what you're saying. Identity theft. Yeah.
Yeah, she's clarifying that somebody else took out a loan application. So someone came to your campus, and it's usually pretty rare that someone comes to your campus. Maybe they think, I'm going to use my friend's ID and sit on this class because it would be a cool class for me. You're going to want to have a policy of, do a police report. Maybe your security team, or if you have an internal police department, might ask for a copy of their driver's license so it can compare what the photo of that person looked like or what the signature of that person looked like. If you determine that fraud happened on your campus, you would have a responsibility to let the innocent person off of the responsibility and pursue your own investigation to try to recover your funds from the thief who attempted to steal that money. And then from there, depending what type of fraud it is it a thief? Is it a family member? Is it a student that's claiming identity theft to try to get out of it, saying, well, here, let me change my signature around a little bit. I've seen that before, where a student wants to say, that's not my signature, and they intentionally did a signature. Or they'll say, I never e-signed. That's not my e-signature. You can't prove it's my signature, and I don't know it. A lot of schools take pictures and say, well, why do we have your picture in the cashier's office?
Exactly.
So I hope that answers your question.
Yes. And again, I think that, Scott, what you were saying about having this all in your policy and procedure about how you're going to manage that, those are really good questions. And you just need to think broadly about the investigation portion of it. And then the follow-up, what the consequences will be. Will you actually litigate? Will you go after a person's family member? How is your university want to handle it? Will they litigate, right?
Yeah. Well, I hope that in this presentation we've put together a book that touches these areas, and you can see how far-reaching it is. GLB, red flags, student awareness, identity theft, policies and procedures, actions and follow-up. There's a lot of moving pieces there, and as shown by the length of our webinar here today. It's 12:30, and let me ask Ruth, do you have any final thoughts on your presentation that you'd like to contribute?
The only thing that I want to offer to our listeners is that while this is very dynamic, there's a lot of information. We, again, are just hoping that this will help them to put those policies and procedures in place by using the templates and the information to make their job easier and to, keep our universities and our students a little safer. So if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to Scott. Also, feel free to email me at ruth.sharp@caltech.edu if you have any other questions about the material I put together, but I think pretty much Scott's so familiar with it, he's happy to administer it on my behalf.
Well, thank you very much. It is a lot of working pieces. So let me just wrap up our presentation here today by saying, one, we'll send you a copy of the recording. It's a lot of information. I urge you to revisit it, as well as the presentation slides, which has a ton of valuable information. Ruth, thank you so much for putting so much information. Those slides, so there's links in the slides to identity theft issues and the Federal Trade Commission, as well as you'll be getting all of these, the GLB program template produced by Nakubo, the letter templates, the red flag policies and procedures, and the student information checklist. We'll be sending that to you. Mark Goodman, I'd like to thank you very much for being online as an advisor and a contributor. And Ruth Sharp, thank you very much again for participating today and presenting this valuable information. We'll follow up this conversation on identity theft. Please bring your questions to the next Collectors Corner, which will be the second Wednesday in July. And then please join us in Las Vegas for a 2.5-day in-depth study on student financial services, July 21st through the 24th at the New York Hotel. Very low cost, incredibly low hotel cost. So look for that in your email to follow up with. And with that, I'll go ahead and conclude the presentation. Thank you all for joining in for a very lengthy discussion, very important topic. And I hope you all have an excellent rest of your day. Take care now. We look forward to seeing you at our next event.